I folded the hospital discharge papers slowly, their corners still warm from the printer, the ink carrying the faint chemical scent of disinfectant and latex gloves. The apartment was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator, the curtains half drawn, the television screen black and reflecting nothing back at me. On the kitchen table sat a frame turned toward the wall, hiding my sister's frozen smile from view. I wondered when my family had stopped being mine and why silence weighed heavier than pain. In the corner of the room, a balloon left by a nurse bobbed softly against the ceiling untouched and out of place in a space that no longer felt alive. Before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Tap, like, subscribe, and stay close for what comes next. I grew up in a neighborhood where every house looked like a copy of the one before it, identical beige siding and neatly trimmed lawns each driveway with a basketball hoop that had seen better days. From the outside, our family looked ordinary, even respectable. But inside, the atmosphere was always weighted with an unspoken sharpness. My mother was obsessed with order and reputation. She believed that the smallest lapse would become gossip, that neighbors could undo her dignity with a single whispered word. Weekends were spent polishing silverware we never used, ironing sheets that no one noticed, scrubbing floors that already shone. There was no room for softness, no time for affection, only vigilance against some imagined judgment. My father had his own patterns. Sundays were sacred to football, his voice rising and falling with the game, a soundtrack that drowned out conversation. Saturdays were for mowing the lawn with military precision. He did not strike me or scream, but his neglect carved deeper than punishment ever could. His laughter, his energy, his teasing, his approval. They were all reserved for Rachel. Rachel was the center of their universe. She had a kind of brightness that demanded attention, golden curls that caught the light, a smile that made even her accidents seem charming, a laugh that filled every corner of the house. She knocked over a vase, and my mother chuckled that she was spirited. She spilled milk across the kitchen table, and my father ruffled her hair as though chaos was endearing. When I, cautious and careful, made a mistake, I was careless, inattentive, a disappointment. That distinction grew clearer as we got older. Teachers praised Rachel for being lively, full of potential, unforgettable. They called me diligent, quiet, dependable. I learned that diligence didn't sparkle, that quiet didn't earn applause. I remember one Thanksgiving so vividly that even now I can smell the roasted turkey, the starch of the tablecloth. I had brought home a certificate for academic achievement, proof that I mattered somewhere beyond those walls. My hands shook as I prepared to show them, rehearsing the moment in my mind as if anticipation might force them to care. Rachel, rushing past me with laughter, spilled cranberry sauce in a thick red flood across the white cloth. The family leapt to their feet, laughing, rushing to save the fabric, scolding her playfully for her clumsiness. I stood holding the certificate invisible, watching the stain bloom like a wound, while the moment dissolved into nothing. By the time the table was restored, no one asked about the paper in my hands. I slipped it into my notebook, pressed it flat between lined pages, and told myself silently that someday they would notice. The years carried more of the same. Rachel stayed out past curfew, and they excused her. I asked to attend a science trip, and I was told not to ask for extras. Rachel sang at the top of her lungs, filling the house with her voice, while I scribbled poetry into silence behind my closed bedroom door. She was called vibrant. I was called plain, yet despite every disappointment, some part of me kept hoping. I wrote in my notebook, "One day they will be proud of me. One day I will be enough." Those words became the prayer I whispered to myself, the one that kept me moving when love felt entirely out of reach. When I left for college, I carried that hope with me, folded into the corners of my suitcase alongside my notebooks. I thought distance might give me perspective, might even make them miss me. Instead, distance only amplified the emptiness. My dorm room was small, painted the color of bandages with a narrow bed pressed against the wall. My roommate plastered her side with photos of smiling parents' vacations on sandy beaches, pets wearing ribbons. My side of the wall stayed bare. There was nothing I wanted to tape up. Holidays came, and while others packed bags to go home, I stayed behind. Plane tickets were too expensive, and the thought of returning to silence was heavier than the loneliness of an empty dorm. On Christmas Eve, my freshman year, I sat in the common room with vending machine pretzels and an orange soda, watching snow collect under the glow of streetlights. Through closed doors, I could hear laughter video calls with families who cared songs drifting like warmth through the building. I stayed on the couch until my soda was flat, fighting the tears that pressed against my throat. College was where I learned endurance. I shelved books in the library until my arms ached. I typed essays on a laptop with a cracked screen that overheated, burning my thighs if I didn't balance it on old textbooks. I ate ramen noodles until the smell made me sick, but I kept going. Professors began to notice not my charm, not my brightness, but my persistence. One recommended me for an internship at a small tech startup. I was terrified, but I went. I stayed late, took notes on napkins when paper ran out, learned how to listen more than I spoke. That internship became another, and then another, and slowly I carved a place for myself where no one could deny my work. Years passed in a blur of late nights, empty takeout containers, scribbled notebooks filled with code ideas, and half-finished reflections. I was not flashy, not the loudest voice in the room, but I became the one people trusted, the one who finished what she started. Then, in a boardroom that smelled of polished wood and strong coffee under the glare of fluorescent lights, an investor slid a contract across the table. $10 million. My hand trembled so violently, I feared I might smear the ink, but I signed. For the first time in my life, I held something undeniable, a piece of paper that said, I mattered. On the train ride home, I imagined it 100 times. I would walk through the door, set the contract on the table, and finally their eyes would widen with pride. My father's jaw would drop. My mother would gasp. Rachel would have no words. I rehearsed it over and over, clutching the folder in my lap, my notebook tucked beside it like a witness. For once, I wasn't going to keep my words secret. I was going to let them see me. The house felt smaller when I pulled into the driveway, as if time had pressed it inward. The siding had yellowed, the windows were smudged, the swing in the backyard rusted into silence. But my heart beat with anticipation as I climbed the steps, folder in hand. I told myself that this time would be different. Inside, nothing had changed. My father sat slouched in his chair, eyes glued to the television, one hand wrapped around a beer. My mother sat knitting her needles, clicking in steady rhythm, head bowed, as if even eye contact required too much effort. Rachel sprawled across the couch, wineglass balanced dangerously on her knee, her smirk curling as she saw me enter. I have news, I said, forcing confidence into my voice. My heart thundered so loudly I could hear it in my ears. They looked up briefly expectant, but uninterested. I opened the folder, pulled out the contract, and laid it on the coffee table like a gift. I signed a deal. $10 million. The room froze for a moment. I waited, breath-caught eyes searching their faces. Then Rachel burst out laughing, sharp and merciless. 10 million. Oh, please! You probably tricked someone or they felt sorry for you. My mother's needles paused, her lips pressing into a thin line. You don't need to brag, she murmured, eyes already returning to her knitting. My father sighed, glanced at the TV, muttered, Is the game on yet? The moment I had rehearsed dissolved into nothing. my chest constricted, heat rising behind my eyes. "I worked for this," I whispered, but the words fell flat. Rachel rose from the couch, wine sloshing dangerously, her eyes glinting with something darker than mockery. She stepped close, her voice low and venomous. "You think you're better than us now?" My parents said nothing. The silence of their complicity pressed against me harder than Rachel's presence. She backed me toward the staircase, her smirk widening, and before I could react, her hands shoved hard against my shoulders. Time fractured. Papers flew from my folder, fluttering midair like broken wings. My body tilted backward. The steps rushed up to meet me. My skull cracked against wood pane, bursting like light behind my eyes. The last thing I saw was the contract sliding across the floor pages, fanned out like feathers torn from a bird. Then the world went black. When awareness crept back into my body, it did not return all at once. It came in layers like curtains being drawn back slowly against my will. First was sound, the mechanical rhythm of a heart monitor, the distant squeak of shoes on waxed linoleum, the whisper of machines breathing for bodies too weak to do it alone. Then came sensation, the weight of sheets that felt far too heavy, the pinch of a needle in my arm, the ache that seemed to pulse from the base of my skull all the way down my spine. Finally came sight, blurry and stinging, a ceiling tile above me stained at the edges, as though it had been watching patients suffer for decades. A nurse leaned in to view her face, framed by a paper mask, her eyes tired but kind. She told me gently that I had been unconscious for days, that the world had gone on spinning while I lay suspended between life and death. "You were in a coma," she said. The word rang through me like a foreign bell. Coma. The syllables carried both terror and disbelief. I tried to ask how long, but my throat cracked with dryness, and the sound I made barely resembled speech. She pressed ice chips against my lips, her gloved hand steady. The moment she left, silence filled the room again. I turned my head slowly, every muscle screaming, expecting to see familiar faces waiting to comfort me. But the chairs beside the bed were empty, their vinyl cushions untouched, a thin layer of dust collecting on the magazines stacked on the table. My family had not been here. Hours blurred into one another, marked only by the changing of nurses and the distant echo of announcements over the intercom. When the door finally opened and I saw my mother's figure, relief surged through me so forcefully it made my eyes sting. She stood at the foot of the bed, her arms crossed, her mouth tight. My father followed, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slouched with the air of a man dragged somewhere against his will. And then Rachel appeared, not contrite, not remorseful, but smirking as though my broken body was a private joke. "You brought this on yourself," my mother said flatly, her tone the same one she used when scolding me for leaving a dish unrinsed. My father's voice was a sigh, low and annoyed. "Rachel didn't mean it. You always make things harder than they have to be." My mouth opened, desperate to defend myself, to cry out for the truth, but the oxygen mask muffled everything. My words fogged the plastic and vanished. They didn't move closer, didn't touch me, didn't even let their eyes rest on the bruises spread across my skin. They turned to each other and began discussing where to eat dinner, as though I were a nuisance they had been forced to endure. The next day, they returned with Rachel again. She leaned against the doorway, sipping coffee, her smile curling with malice. "Guess you're not so invincible after all," she said. My parents chuckled with her, shaking their heads at my fragility, as if I were a pathetic stranger. The laughter felt heavier than any wound. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks, counting the tiles, anything to keep myself from screaming. It was not flowers from them that filled the room, but a single balloon left by a nurse. Bright yellow letters looping across it in cheerful ink. Get well soon. The balloon bobbed gently, its reflection quivering on the polished floor whenever someone walked by. That balloon was more comfort than my family could give. Lying there tethered to machines, bruised and humiliated, I understood something permanent love was never coming from them. Leaving the hospital felt less like freedom and more like exile. They wheeled me out with a folder of discharge instructions clutched in my trembling hands. My parents weren't there to pick me up. I called a cab, the driver loading my small bag silently into the trunk. My head still throbbed with every bump in the road, but worse was the hollowness in my chest. The apartment I rented downtown was small, its walls still smelling of paint, its windows rattling whenever trucks passed outside. I sat on the bed the first night staring at the peeling ceiling, wondering how to begin again with a body that betrayed me and a family that abandoned me. Every step hurt. My legs shook when I tried to walk across the room. I spilled boiling water the first time I tried to make tea, burning my hand as tears blurred my vision. But I kept going. I pressed forward even when every part of me wanted to collapse. Recovery was brutal, but not entirely lonely. One evening, as I struggled with grocery bags, an older woman from next door opened her door. Mrs. Taylor, retired teacher, hair pinned in silver coils, eyes lined with wisdom. She didn't ask permission. She simply took the bags from my arms and carried them inside. Later that week, she appeared again with a casserole, the scent of herbs filling my tiny apartment. You shouldn't be alone all the time, she said. Her words pierced something in me I hadn't realized was starved care without conditions. And then came Evelyn, an old friend from college, now a lawyer, she called after hearing fragments of what had happened. Tell me everything, she urged. At first, I resisted. Saying it aloud felt like picking open a wound, exposing the pus of betrayal. But Evelyn waited. Her silence was not the silence of my parents. It was patient, steady, ready to hold what I gave her. So I told her the staircase, the shove, the coma, the laughter. When I finished, her voice was firm but full of fire. You don't have to stay quiet anymore. You deserve justice. The word justice sounded foreign, almost dangerous, like a language I was never meant to speak. I had lived my life believing that silence was safer, that invisibility protected me. But silence had not saved me. It had almost killed me. If I had stayed quiet, Rachel's push would have been buried as clumsiness, my parents' neglect, written off as misunderstanding. I thought of the balloon swaying alone in my hospital room, the only testament to my survival. For the first time, I wondered if speaking out could be my way of living again. Evelyn came to my apartment with a briefcase spreading documents across the kitchen table. We made lists, highlighted medical reports, pulled together photos of bruises I had taken in the mirror with trembling hands, text messages where Rachel's cruelty bled through in black and white. And then there was the contract. I pulled it from my bag, its pages crumpled and torn from the fall. Late into the night, I sat smoothing each sheet, taping them together piece by piece. The seams showed scars running through the words. But it was whole again, as I was beginning to be. That contract was no longer just money. It was proof that my work, my life had value, even when my family tried to destroy it. The weeks before the hearing passed in a haze of exhaustion, fear, and relentless preparation. Evelyn insisted that every detail mattered, every inconsistency could be used against us, and every page of evidence had to be airtight. Her kitchen table became a battlefield. Files stacked into towers, sticky notes clung to their edges like neon flags, pens rolled between half-empty coffee mugs, and legal pads filled with Evelyn's quick, angular handwriting spread across the surface. We spent hours there, my body still sore from the fall, my head pounding when I tried to concentrate too long, but she refused to let me retreat. "You've lived through worse than paperwork," she would remind me, her voice calm but unyielding. She made me practice reading depositions aloud, sometimes for hours. At first, my voice cracked, and the words trembled on my tongue, refusing to leave. My chest tightened, my palms sweated, my throat dried until it hurt to speak. Every sentence dragged me back into the memory of that staircase, the cold wood against my skull. Rachel's smirk as darkness swallowed me. I stumbled over the words, humiliated, but Evelyn never lost her patience. She would stop me, gently press a glass of water into my hand, and say, "Again." This time, slower, steadier. "You can do this." And eventually, after countless attempts, my voice stopped breaking on the first word. The sentences came smoother, stronger, until I could say them without flinching. But when night fell and Evelyn's lights went dark, my strength crumbled. Sleep was a stranger. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the refrigerator in my apartment, the only company. When I did drift off, dreams dragged me back to the staircase. In one nightmare, I felt Rachel's shove again, but this time there was no floor, only endless air. I fell for what felt like hours, the contract papers fluttering beside me out of reach, until I woke, gasping, drenched in sweat, my body tangled in sheets that felt like restraints. In another, I stood in the hospital bed, surrounded not by nurses, but by my parents, their laughter echoing so loudly it drowned out the machines. I begged them to listen, to look at me, but my voice dissolved into silence. I would wake with my heart-pounding chest aching, terrified that these dreams were rehearsals for what awaited me in court. Still, each morning, I pulled myself out of bed. I forced myself to shower, to dress, to gather the scattered strength I had left, and walk back into Evelyn's apartment where the files awaited. Each day was a battle against the whispers in my own head, telling me I would fail. One afternoon, Evelyn suggested I buy something specific to wear for court. "Clothes matter," she said. "They remind people of the person you want them to see. And sometimes they remind you of it too." I hesitated. I had never cared about clothes, had spent years dressing in whatever was clean and quiet. But she insisted, so I walked into a department store alone, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of perfume thick in the air. I tried on a navy blue suit, simple but structured. When I looked into the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back did not look invisible. She looked steady, armored, prepared for battle. My throat tightened, tears stinging my eyes, because for once, the reflection didn't look like someone waiting for approval. It looked like someone who no longer needed it. Meanwhile, my parents and Rachel were not idle. Word reached me through neighbors and acquaintances. They were spreading rumors, poisoning the air with lies. They said I was ungrateful, that I had fabricated the story for attention, that I was trying to ruin Rachel's life out of jealousy. Some even said I had faked the contract, that no one in their right mind would entrust me with that kind of money. Every time I walked down the street, I felt eyes on me, whispers, following in my wake like shadows. People who once nodded politely now turned away, their expressions stiff, their silence louder than words. It was as though my family had built a cage of lies around me, and the town was all too eager to lock me inside. The weight of it nearly broke me. One night, after another nightmare, I collapsed at my kitchen table, staring at the files Evelyn had left for me to review. The words blurred, and the tears spilled unchecked. My chest heaved, and I whispered into the empty room, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I can't do this. I wanted to give up, to retreat back into silence, to fold myself small and disappear like I had so many times before. But the knock came just then, soft, insistent. When I opened the door, Mrs. Taylor stood there, a bowl of soup in her hands, steam curling in the hallway air. She set it down on the table without a word, pulled out a chair, and sat across from me. She listened as I sobbed, as I confessed how afraid I was, how heavy it all felt. She didn't scold me for weakness, didn't rush me past the tears. When I finally quieted, she placed her thin hand over mine and said, "They've stolen enough of your life. Don't let them steal your voice too. You survived for a reason. Speak." Her words settled in me like a seed. The next morning, when I opened my notebook, I didn't write the way I had as a child, hiding my thoughts from the world. This time, I wrote with intention. I filled the pages with memories, with the truth, with the feelings I was afraid would betray me in court if I kept them locked inside. Each word was a rehearsal, each sentence a brick in the foundation of the testimony I would give. It was painful, like tearing skin from bone, but it was also liberating. For the first time, the notebook wasn't a place of secrecy. It was preparation. It was a weapon. The days crawled, but slowly I could feel something shifting inside me. Fear still lived in my chest, but beside it grew something new: determination. Each time I practiced with Evelyn, my voice steadied further. Each time Mrs. Taylor left soup or encouragement at my door, I felt less alone. Each time I put on the navy suit in front of the mirror, I believed a little more in the woman staring back. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat in the dark with the taped-together contract spread across my lap. My fingers traced the scars of tape that held it whole. I thought of how close I had come to losing it, how close I had come to losing myself. And I whispered into the stillness, as though speaking to the girl who had once written in her notebook that someday her family would notice. For once, my words will be heard. This time, I won't disappear. The courthouse was heavy with history, its wooden benches polished by decades of restless bodies waiting for justice. The air smelled of dust and old paper of judgment hanging in the rafters. My parents sat on one side, Rachel between them, all three smirking as though victory was inevitable. They believed I would falter, that fear would collapse me before truth could. When my name was called, I rose with Evelyn at my side. My legs trembled, but my spine held. Each step toward the front echoed in the cavernous room, every sound magnified, until even my heartbeat seemed audible. Then the doors opened again, and a man entered. The investor. The one who had signed my contract. His presence shifted the room. He walked with calm certainty, his gaze steady on me. My father's face drained of color. My mother gasped, clutching at the bench before sinking into it, pale and shocked. Rachel's smirk cracked her mouth, hanging open. He testified first, confirming the legitimacy of my contract, my achievement, my work ethic. He dismantled every lie my family had spread, that I had tricked someone, that I had fabricated success, that I was unworthy. His words carried weight my family could not deny. Then it was my turn. I stood, my hands shaking only slightly, and told my story. The staircase, the shove, the hospital room where I lay, abandoned while they mocked me. I spoke of the silence that suffocated me more than the injury itself. I laid the taped-together contract on the stand, its scars visible but intact. "This is what I built," I said, my voice clear. "This is what I almost lost." The silence afterward was profound, but for once it was mine. The judge listened, and the ruling came: protective orders, financial penalties. Rachel disgraced my parents, humiliated. But victory did not taste like revenge. It tasted like release. I walked out into the bright afternoon, the navy suit fitting like armor, Evelyn beside me, Mrs. Taylor waiting with tears in her eyes. That evening, sunlight poured through my apartment window, glinting off the framed contract I had hung on the wall. Its taped seams caught the light like veins of gold. I opened my notebook one last time and wrote, "I no longer wait for them to see me. I see myself." Before we end, I want to ask you, have you ever been abandoned by those who should have protected you? Have you ever had to find strength in your own voice when theirs failed you? Share your story below. I want to hear it. And if this story spoke to you, please comment, like, subscribe, and share, so others know they are not alone. Thank you for staying with me. May you find your own door to walk through, and may it open toward peace.